Live from Arlington, Virginia, this is Transport Topics Newsmakers, the digital interview series that gives you access to candid conversations between industry experts and a veteran reporter. Thanks go to our sponsor, Quality Carriers. Here's your host, Dan Ronan.
Welcome to Newsmakers from Transport Topics. I'm Dan Ronan. I'm pleased to host this conversation with leading figures in the trucking, freight, and logistics industries. Before we begin our conversation with our two guests, Candace Paris with Truckers Against Trafficking and Elizabeth Barna with the American Trucking Associations, I want to tell you that Quality Carriers is the sponsor for this edition of Newsmakers. Their leadership has a short message that they'd like to convey to all of you. So let's watch the message, and we'll be back on the other side with our guest right after this message.
Hi, I'm Randy Strutz, President of Quality Carriers, a division of CSX. As the leading bulk chemical carrier in North America, with over 100 locations, over 2,500 drivers, and servicing the top chemical customers, we are proud to support Truckers Against Trafficking as a corporate sponsor. Truckers Against Trafficking was formed to combat human trafficking throughout North America. Please join Truckers Against Trafficking if you're not already a member in their fight against this criminal enterprise. Thanks so much for your time.
First, a little bit about our two guests who are joining us. Elizabeth Barna is the Executive Vice President at the American Trucking Associations, and she rejoined the ATA in 2005 after 7 years with the Motor Freight Carriers Association. She first joined the ATA in 1990 and has 35 years experience in the transportation-related fields. She is also on the board of directors of Truckers Against Trafficking and Trucker Buddy Association. Candace Paris is the co-founder and executive director of Truckers Against Trafficking. It is a nonprofit organization that helps educate, equip, empowers, and mobilizes members of the trucking and travel plaza industry to combat domestic commercial sex trafficking. During her leadership at the Truckers Against Trafficking organization, they have trained, this is an astonishing number, more than 1.2 million truck drivers, bus drivers, and truck stop employees how to spot commercial sex trafficking and teach them how to be the eyes and ears of our nation's roadway. We welcome both of you to Newsmakers. Candace, let me first discuss with you, what is the scope of the problem with regards to commercial sex trafficking in the trucking industry?
Well, the numbers are broad in terms of how many victims exist globally. It's around 40 million, and that's both on the sex trafficking and labor trafficking side. When we're talking about the United States, hundreds of thousands of people are forced into sex trafficking on an annual basis in the United States. It's unfortunate that too many of them are children. In fact, in the last 5 years alone, calls from truck drivers specifically from the National Human Trafficking Hotline, 41% of calls from truck drivers have involved minors, which just helps you understand a little bit in terms of who's at risk and what truck drivers are actually seeing out there.
Elizabeth, this really is a form of involuntary slavery, isn't it? And what is the ATA and other groups such as the ATA doing to combat the problem?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dan. It is a form of slavery. ATA and its membership are very excited to be working with Truckers Against Trafficking. We raise awareness and encourage training to our membership. Through our encouraging training and raising awareness, we're using, our newsletters, events that we do. We highlight the results, especially when there's been an incident where a trucker did make the call and saved lives. We were one of the first places that the new Freedom Trailer went, and that was at NTDC in Indianapolis a number of years ago, but to really bring awareness to those drivers and to their families as well. Our ATA chair, Sherry Brumbaugh, served on the DOT Advisory Committee to come up with best practices for human trafficking, one of which was to have a zero tolerance policy in your company, and many of our companies have adopted that. I speak to a number of different groups trying to raise awareness, and especially using TAT as the model. Many of the modes of transportation have similar programs like TAT, but none is as well thought out or as detailed as TAT. And so a lot of those modes look at TAT to develop their programs. We've also raised a lot of awareness on Capitol Hill with members of Congress, with the White House, and working with them. And then lastly, I would say through our America's Road team. Our captains work directly with Candace and her team at getting the message out. They are ambassadors for TAT. They participate in the man-to-man campaign, which is sort of a peer-to-peer campaign saying, if there is no demand, then there is no human trafficking. And so encouraging their peers to stop doing anything, but also to really be the eyes and ears out there. And we continue to train our captains that aren't trained. So I like to say, not only do our professional drivers save lives on the highway, but through TAT and the education and training that they've given them, they also save victims' lives and families for that.
Candace, it does sound as though you have a lot of allies on board in terms of this battle that your organization is fighting. What about other organizations, including the Truck Stop Operators Associations? I understand they've been very active in this as well.
In fact, yeah, that's true, Dan. They've even created their own training specifically for truck stop operators around what they can be looking for and how to take a victim-centered approach when it comes to actually interacting with potential victims on your lot. So, and they've been a big supporter and participator in our coalition builds, which bring together federal, state, and local law enforcement with private industries, specifically carriers and truck stop employees, and getting these guys to the same table to really formulate a local response to this crime.
Elizabeth, were you going to jump in on that?
Yeah, I was going to jump in real fast. One of the other things that is, and not another association, but another entity, is the Trucking Cares Foundation. And we have been supporting TAT for the past few years, but really trying to raise awareness. And that's one of TCF's focus, is to highlight human trafficking and the work that the Truckers Against Trafficking does.
A recent article, and I'll direct this to both of you, but Candace first, a recent article I read said that truck stops, because sometimes they're out of the way locations, that traffickers will exploit people there because they sometimes do not attract the attention from law enforcement, and many times the customers who are using these facilities are transient. Let's talk about the law enforcement aspect of this in terms of what police, local, state, and other law enforcement entities are doing. Candace?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, it's a public parking lot, right? Anybody can come and go. You can have security out on the lot, but you can't see everything, which is part of the reason why we're really training the truck drivers as well as truck stop employees. When you are out there, these are the red flags to look for. But that's another reason why we actually train law enforcement personnel, right? And you don't want the truck driver to call in and then law enforcement to show up and have a 15-year-old arrested as a child prostitute, right? There is no such thing as a child prostitute. And so we're working steadily to train law enforcement, whether it's an interdiction stop or they get a call out to a truck stop or a hotel motel. How do they take a victim-centered approach, right? How do they actually work to not only arrest the perpetrator, the trafficker, but also the buyer? Because as Elizabeth was saying, if you don't have any buyers, you don't have any victims. Thus, you have no sex trafficking. So that's part of the reason why we do our coalition bills. That's part of the reason why we offer an in-depth law enforcement training, and we travel across the nation. Actually, one of our survivor leaders on staff is a part of those trainings to train law enforcement firsthand on how to take a victim-centered approach. And really, if we can get the private and public sectors, right, trucking and law enforcement, to be looking for this, to be caring about these individuals, and to create a timely response response on their behalf, that's going to be a great deterrent, right, in terms of shutting down traffickers and also making hopefully truck stops and any places truck drivers frequent unfriendly places for trafficking.
Elizabeth, go ahead and jump in on that. I know that you have some thoughts about that as well.
Sure. I would just add that ATA did announce about a year ago the ATA Law Enforcement Advisory Board. And on that board is a number of our state association execs that are prior law enforcement. And, all 50 state trucking associations are partners with TAT, and we're very proud of that. But that is one of the things that the Law Enforcement Advisory Board is very engaged in and would like to be more active in now that they're up and running, is working with TAT on this issue and working with law enforcement and trying to tie the two together more so than is already done, which is already just great strides that they've made.
Candace, is it getting any easier to patrol truck stops and travel plazas, also rest areas that may be run by states or the like, local governments, because of the fact that high definition cameras have become so prevalent and they're so relatively inexpensive that you don't need, in a lot of cases, a security guard or someone patrolling the grounds. It can be done with a camera, and you can get a pretty good 360 view of a facility. And maybe there is something nefarious going on that a security guard, a law enforcement officer can be notified and can stop it. And as you said, get the person who's being victimized to a safer place. Is that helping at all too?
I think it's a case-by-case basis, Dan. There was a case at the end of last year where the driver actually caught a picture of the potential victim on his webcam. That was turned over to law enforcement. Unfortunately, they weren't able to locate the victim in in a different state because she had been moved at that point. But anything like that is extremely helpful for law enforcement to make a case. One of the bigger things that I think we're seeing is State Patrol conducting more and more undercover investigations at places like truck stops and rest areas, places that truckers frequent. And again, working with truck stop personnel on this, because it's a team approach, right? Nobody is saying it's the truck stop's fault or anything like that. It's a matter of, hey, let's work together. It's the traffickers that are exploiting the victims. It's the traffickers that are exploiting these locations. And so we're seeing different department units, and TAT assists them with these undercover investigations, going in and actually recovering victims and taking a victim-centered approach, and indeed making arrests. They've arrested many, many pimps, as well as doing undercover reverse stings, which is where you're focused around targeting the buyers and the men who are fueling the sex trade by, again, creating the demand for these victims in the first place.
And we should point out, and I'm sure both of you would like to do this, that the plazas, the rest stop operators and the like, they're not happy about this type of activity taking place on their property because it is illegal. It does, bring down the reputation of the facility. They're not in favor of this. They want to root this out as much as anybody, I would imagine.
I would just applaud all of those folks for training every one of their employees. There has been instances, and Candace, this, that it's been somebody that's been cleaning up the lot and come in and made that phone call, and it has resulted in saving a victim. And so, by training not just the professional truck drivers or the people behind the counter, they're training everybody, and I really applaud them for that.
Yeah. In fact, two of our Harriet Tubman Award winners, past Harriet Tubman Award winners, were Travel Plaza employees, exactly, who are keeping an eye out, who put their training into practice. And that's the highest award we give for somebody whose direct actions help save or improve the life of somebody caught up in sexual exploitation. So we have seen a tremendous amount from these folks. And let's not forget, too, this is happening in all sorts of locations. I mean, number one place where it's actually going down are hotel motels. Well, we know truckers are are frequenting those places too, right? We had a truck driver who won our Harriet Tubman Award. He was parked outside of Compton, California, outside of a local business when he was approached by a young lady, 19-year-old, who had just fought off her would-be trafficker. And he was parked at a local business to unload, and it was 3:30 a.m. in the morning, right? So, this trafficking happens everywhere. And it's really a matter of, hey, drivers, you're the eyes and ears of our nation's highways. You're often in locations where you may intersect with victims. Can you be looking for these red flags? Can you be looking for these signs, and then make a call on behalf of the victim? That's how we're actually seeing victim recovery come about, because people take a second look, because they care enough to get involved.
I would add, Dan, that Kendra said something, that it happens everywhere. When I'm out speaking in different communities or to different groups, and I tell them every area of the country that it happens, it could be your next door neighbor. People are really shocked by that. And I think by raising the awareness that TAT is doing and that ATA and the membership is doing, really is opening the eyes to many people.
We're about halfway through our TT Newsmakers, talking with two great guests. Candace Parrish, she is with Truckers Against Trafficking, and Elizabeth Barna, she's with the American Trucking Association. Candace, I want to ask you, you mentioned this a couple times, the Harriet Tubman Award. What is that?
That is our highest award that we give as an organization. It's named after, of course, Harriet Tubman, who operated the Underground Railroad, right, and brought many, many slaves to freedom. And in that, obviously, a little bit of a different vein, but really, here are these truck drivers, right? It's a transportation kind of theme, but also truck stop employees. We've replicated our model into the bus industry. And so any of the industries that we're really working with, we're saying, hey, have you made a call? Have your direct actions led to somebody being removed from a sexually exploitative situation? And once a year we pick a winner. It's a big to-do. This award is sponsored by Protective Insurance. The winner comes out to their really 5-star gala. They get Indianapolis 500 tickets, a $2,500 check, and really are presented, treated like a king or a queen for the weekend. And we know that's not why anybody does what they do, but it's also fantastic for us to put some names with faces, because we get a lot of stats, right? And we get a lot of numbers. It's so wonderful to actually meet the men and women who are making these calls, who are intervening, who are stepping up and making a huge difference out there. And I'm very excited, Dan. I won't spoil it, but we will be announcing our Harriet Tubman Award winner for 2021 at the end of this month, actually.
Okay, so when that announcement is made, please give us the information so we can put together a story at ttnews.com and get that information out to all of our readers. Of course, we would certainly be interested to find that out as well. What exactly, and I'll address this to both of you, you've used the phrase victim-centered approach in terms of the way you treat people. What exactly does that mean? Here, it sounds like a great phrase, but what does exactly mean in practice?
Yeah. Well, if you've been around trucking for long enough, you know that the classic term for a truck stop prostitute is a lot lizard, right? And I think so many people, if you're not familiar with that vernacular, it's like, well, she's just a prostitute, or he's just a prostitute, because it's not just female victims, right? And so really the goal of Truckers Against Trafficking, it's a cultural shift. It's a heart shift, right? A mindset change where you go from that kind of just a prostitute mentality and really move toward, I'm looking at a potential victim, right? So, I mean, how many people want to help a lizard, right? Nobody. It's an objectifying term. And so when we actually humanize the individual, when we start thinking about their backstory, why they're actually out there, who may be forcing them to do that, all of a sudden, right, you have much more compassion, much more care. And so when we talk to the trucking industry, when we talk to law enforcement, when we talk to truck stop employees, it's not about getting them off your lot. It's really about, how do I help the victim? That's a victim-centered approach. How can I help this individual exit the situation that they're in? And sometimes, honestly, a kind word, or like offering them food or water, or here, do you need to make use my phone to make a call to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, or can I just listen to your story? Those go a long way. We've heard survivor after survivor after survivor talk about when they were treated like a human, when they were actually cared for by law enforcement or a member of the general public. It made a huge difference and helping them understand, like, yes, freedom is possible, because you have to imagine what they're going through. Their life every day is being raped again and again and again. And if they don't make their quota, then they're beaten on top of that. Their family members are threatened. They're physically isolated. Some are forced into drug addiction. Some are knifed. Some are shot. Like, I mean, this is their life. So can you imagine when somebody actually takes the time to care about them? How are you doing? Right? And actually says, hey, I'm here for you. And law enforcement believes their story and says, I'm here to offer you services, not to handcuff you and throw you behind bars. And that's what we mean when we say take a victim-centered approach. In fact, Sapp Brothers, one of our truck stop partners, they have Help Now. They started a Help Now campaign where they literally have these red push buttons in their bathrooms where victims can push those, and it alerts the cashier that individual, there's somebody in the store that needs assistance. And they did that specifically around trying to take a victim-centered approach and wanting to actually aid these individuals. So that's what we're talking about. When a truck driver sees a person going from door to door to door, he or she is thinking about, how can I help that person? Not, oh, I hope they don't come to my door, right? That's a victim-centered approach, and certainly law enforcement offering those services, putting that victim first, and hopefully it translates into them becoming a survivor.
Elizabeth, to Candace's point, when you hear the expression lot lizard, it really is a demeaning pejorative in terms of describing a human being in a way that, is so, it's vulgar. And here, those folks that do traffic in this seem to be that's what they're trying to do, to dehumanize the person who's being sold for sexual exploitation.
It's very similar to what we're trying to do with an image campaign, is put a face behind the wheel of a professional truck driver. To be able to humanize that driver is what we're asking drivers and the public to do with the victims, and really help them, as Candace laid out. Lot lizard is very degrading, and you don't want to help them. I mean, it's just one of those things that you're like, oh, they chose that path, where in fact they haven't, and they're actually a victim, as Candace described.
What are some of the signs that a person may be a victim of sexual trafficking? Is there any particular demographic? You mentioned that in some cases it's people who might have been runaways or left bad environments in their home community. Any sort of sign that we should be looking for, or a demographic, young woman, young boy, 18 to 21, anything in that range?
Yeah. So first and foremost, any minor selling commercial sex is a victim of sex trafficking by federal definition. And that, I don't care if she's smiling or says she wants to be out there, or he, right? That person is a child, and they need the adult to step up and do the right thing and make a call on their behalf. So certainly minors. I would also say anybody under pimp control, right? That car pulls onto the lot, 3 or 4 girls all get out, start working the row. That's a clear sign of pimp control. Somebody's talking over the CB radio about needing to make a quota, or having a daddy or a boyfriend role. That's certainly, right, a red flag that something may be happening. Tattooing on the individual. A lot of times it's on their neck or a different part of their face and their arm, but it's a tattoo that shows ownership. That's something to look for. Individuals that are fearful or disheveled or are unfamiliar with their surroundings. One of the greatest questions a truck driver can just ask is, when's the last time you've seen your family? Or even questions like, where do you like to eat around here? Because those traffickers, they're moving their victims from point A to point B. They don't want them to form relationships. They don't want them to know where they are. They don't want them to understand where they can get help. And when you're talking about, certain demographics, absolutely, Dan, disproportionately victims of human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking, are women and girls of color. And disproportionately, the buyers are white men. And so when we're talking about, right, systemic racism and the ways in which it is so entrenched in our country, this has certainly played out in sex trafficking and in prostitution in general. So absolutely, I would say folks that are more at risk are people who experience racial discrimination, people who are undocumented, who may have immigration issues. But like the other ones you're talking about, kids that are escaping bad family situations, who are more vulnerable, may have sexual abuse in their own history. Again, there's all sorts of reasons why people are actually out there. And the question we hope a driver will ask when they get that knock is, what is this person's backstory? If we can start asking that question at the start and even try to empathize a little bit and put ourselves in their shoes, that will go a long way to compassion and picking up a phone and making a call on their behalf.
I would imagine. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
I was just going to say, and a lot of times, you can ask them, hey, do you have your own ID? Or, they never have money because there's somebody else out there with them paying for them. They don't want them to be able to have anything to be able to get away.
Yeah, money represents freedom and the potential to use that money to escape, to get out, to get an Uber, to do whatever you need to do to flee as quickly as possible. I would imagine, too, that the internet, and thankfully a lot of pages, we're not going to mention what they were, but a lot of pages and a lot of websites that engage in commercial sex trafficking have been shut down. I would imagine the internet has made it a lot easier for people to engage in this type of activity.
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, you can buy a child for sex, almost like you're buying a sofa on eBay. I mean, that's how easy it is and sad it is. And where one are shut down, like Backpage.com, unfortunately, too many pop up in its place. So yes, it has certainly helped with the proliferation of this crime and making it even more accessible. That's one of the reasons why we're constantly talking to parents about, hey, do you know who your kids are talking to online? Because where are these victims coming from, right? And a lot of that recruitment is even happening through Facebook, through other social media forums, and so on and so forth. So if your child has an internet connection and, a computer, and they're in their room, you should know who they're actually talking to online. But yes, this is part of the reason why law enforcement invests a great deal of money, though, of also using the internet to conduct reverse stings. And, while we're on this topic, make no, do not be confused. If we think about, people often talk about how we should just legalize prostitution. And if we legalize prostitution, well, then you wouldn't have sex trafficking. But this is not a profession. This is the world's oldest oppression here. And when we think about a job description, I just have a few numbers I want to share real briefly. 73% of people in prostitution have been physically assaulted. 53% have reported rape. 75% have gone homeless. 68% have PTSD. That's more than double that for military veterans. Think about that. That's not a job description. This is exploitation from a prostitution all the way to sex trafficking level. And yes, the internet's only proliferated it. And when we think about, if anybody is under the misconception that, buyers are harmless, all they need to go out is read a couple buyer boards in terms of how buyers talk about the individuals that they purchase. There is no humanity in that at all. It is perverse and downright evil in terms of how they're actually talking about this subset of the population who they believe their body should be available for their sexual gratification, available for purchase.
And yet there is a segment of society that glamorizes this and makes it out to be something that it is, that it's not, that it's, one step below modeling or being an actress or walking on the red carpet at a movie premiere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. And law enforcement will tell you that, at least from sex trafficking, the average year survival rate is 7 years. 7 years. So this is exploitation, pure and simple. And we have to ask ourselves: Are we willing to just give a subset of our culture over to being bought and sold in these most degraded ways? And buyers, that's too nice of a word. I hate the word, John. Buyers, too nice of a word. This is paid rape. That's what it is. It's rape for profit, pure and simple. And that's really what's happening in almost all of these circumstances and situations. And that's where, when we think about legislation and legalizing prostitution and all that, legislators need to really think about that. And where we hear from survivor after survivor after survivor, the majority of whom say this is exploitation at its most basic form. And it's something that passing a law is not going to clean it up. You can't clean up something that's inherently exploitive. It's impossible to do.
We said at the top of our interview that more than 1.2 million people have been trained to spot signs of sex trafficking. Let's discuss the extent of the training and how people who are in the civilian world, they're not truck drivers, they're not bus drivers, they're not travel plaza owners or operators, but how folks who might be interested in this can spot this if they are a customer at a travel plaza, or they happen to know someone who might be in this situation who needs help. Let's talk and spend the next 4 or 5 minutes before we wrap things up and conclude about this training and about what's being done.
Well, I would say the easiest thing for folks to do is, one, you can either download our app by going into any app store and type in Truckers Against Trafficking. It's free of charge on any platform. And all the signs to look for are right there. Sex trafficking red flags, labor trafficking red flags. We've got case studies. All of that is right there, right at the touch of a finger. Also, our website, truckersagainsttrafficking.org. We have a free of charge training right there. They can go to our portal. Anybody can take that. And again, hear the stories firsthand from survivors. Learn about those red flags. Have this information that's super readily available. Get the hotline number to call, which is 1-888-3737-888. That's the National Human Trafficking Hotline number. Anyone, anywhere, anytime can report human trafficking.
Repeat that one.
Yes, that number is 1-888-3737-888. And that's a great number to call too if you're just unsure if what you're looking at is human trafficking, and you want to talk to a 24/7 trained personnel individual on this. So, but also if you're seeing a crime in progress, call 911 and say, I suspect human trafficking. Don't say, I suspect prostitution, because that's going to elevate that from a dispatch perspective. But all those red flags, all those signs are there. Again, the two biggest, you see a minor selling commercial sex or any kind of pimp control, right away, you need to report that to law enforcement.
To both of you, Elizabeth, and I want to ask our final question here. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the things, Dan, ATA brought in the moving and storage industry into ATA, and I was actually shocked when we did training with them on their training and what they're looking for when they're going into homes to move people or as they're moving people to storage and things like that. So, it hits every industry, but everybody can make a huge difference.
To conclude our conversation, like anything else, doesn't this come down to doing the right thing, whether you're a religious person or not, but just good moral behavior, ultimately doing the right thing as a person by saying, I'm not going to engage in commercial sex, and also standing up for people who are, in many cases, at the lowest rung of society and who are being exploited, and saying, you know what, their life has as much value as mine, and I need to pick up the phone and call 911 and say, I think there's something nefarious that's going on here, or I know of a young lady who's in a vulnerable situation and I need someone to check on her. Doesn't it come down to just doing good moral behavior, the right thing, the golden rule?
Absolutely, Dan. You're hitting the nail on the head. And I think the other part of that is to not assume somebody else will make the call. And I think sometimes we're in a hurry, or we just assume somebody else may have seen that. And to take the time, we always tell audiences, we're like, if you're wrong, okay, it's 10, 20 minutes out of your life. But what if you're right? What if you're right? What if what you're looking at is what you think it might be? You could help this woman or help this individual get their pathway back to freedom. You could stop years of torture and abuse for this individual. So yes, it's absolutely saying, what would I want somebody to do for my daughter, for my son, for myself, right? What would I want another parent to do on behalf of my child? And taking the time to actually get involved.
Elizabeth, you get the final word.
I was just going to add that with a lot of our drivers, when they are beginning to get trained for this, we talk about, what if this was your kid? What if this was your granddaughter? What if this was your next door neighbor? And all of a sudden, that you can see it ringing upstairs, they are automatically engaged in that. And so I applaud everybody out there that is helping to raise the awareness, and thank you, Dan, and TT News for helping us do that.
Well, thank you both, Candace and Elizabeth. Two great guests, very passionate about this important topic, and I'm sure that at some point down the road we will address this again. And as you said, Candace, you've got an announcement coming up in a couple of weeks concerning the Harriet Tubman Award, and we will make sure to cover that at TT News. In closing, we want to thank our fine sponsor, Quality Carriers, for making this Transport Topics Newsmakers available. We appreciate their fine support. We also thank Elizabeth and Candace for being so gracious and so very, very good with their time to answer our questions. Going forward, we're planning more of these Newsmakers in the very near future, and we will have an announcement soon about when the next Newsmakers will take place and who our guest will be. I know we'll have a great program, and we're always very excited about having these type of presentations. Also, this webcast will be available for viewing on demand, so go to ttnews.com for more information how you can catch our interview with Elizabeth and Candace. I'm Dan Ronan from Transport Topics. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information on future episodes, visit ttnews.com. This has been Transport Topics Newsmakers.